So, let's start. Number 10. The Piri Reis Map. In 1929, a group of historians working inside the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul made a discovery that nobody was prepared for. Tucked inside a collection of old documents was a map drawn on gazelle skin. It was dated 1513. The cartographer was an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, a well-known naval commander who had fought in the Mediterranean and written extensively about sailing routes. The map itself was not unusual at first glance. It showed the Atlantic Ocean. It showed the coastlines of Europe and West Africa. It showed the eastern coast of South America with reasonable accuracy for the 16th century. Then the historians looked at the bottom of the map. There, extending across the lower portion of the parchment, was a detailed coastline that curved from east to west in a shape that matched, almost exactly, the northern coast of Antarctica. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1818, 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. The coastline on the map was not a rough guess, it was not a decorative flourish, it was a detailed rendering of a landmass that included bays, inlets, and geographical features that modern satellite surveys have since confirmed exist beneath the ice sheet that has covered Antarctica for at least 6,000 years. Piri Reis himself left a note on the map. He wrote that he had compiled it from older source maps, some of them dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and some that he described as being of unknown origin. The question nobody has answered is simple. Who drew the original maps? Who charted an Antarctic coastline before the ice covered it, at a time when no civilization we know of possessed the navigation technology to reach that part of the world? Official explanations have suggested errors in projection, coincidental shapes, and misidentification of South American coastlines. But cartographers who have studied the Piri Reis map in detail consistently note that the scale, the curvature of the Earth, and the placement of the landmass are too specific to be accidental. A map drawn in 1513, showing a continent that would not be discovered for another 3 centuries, charted from sources that no longer exist. That is where the record ends, and that is where the questions begin. Number 9. The Waldseemüller Map. In 1507, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller produced a world map that would quietly reshape the history of exploration. The map was remarkable for one reason above all others. It was the first document in recorded history to use the name America, printed across a landmass in the Western Hemisphere, that Waldseemüller depicted with startling accuracy. The problem is the date. Christopher Columbus completed his first voyage in 1492. Amerigo Vespucci, the explorer whose name Waldseemüller used for the new continent, had only completed coastal expeditions along the eastern edge of South America by that point. Neither man had mapped the interior. Neither man had reached the Pacific coast of the Americas. Yet the Waldseemüller map shows the Pacific Ocean, a body of water that Europeans would not officially sight until 1513, when Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama. The map shows the Americas as a separate landmass surrounded by ocean on both sides. 6 years before any European is recorded as having seen the Pacific from the American side. When historians confronted this discrepancy, Waldseemüller did something unusual. In 1513, he produced a revised world map and quietly removed the name America from it, without explanation. He replaced it with a label that simply read Terra Incognita, unknown land. He never explained the change. He never discussed what source maps he had used for his original 1507 version. And he never addressed the Pacific coastline that should not have been there. The 1507 map was considered lost for nearly 400 years. A single surviving copy was rediscovered in a German castle in 1901. The United States Library of Congress purchased it in 2003 for $10 million, the largest amount ever paid for a historical document at that time. The source maps Waldseemüller used have never been identified. Number 8. The Zeno Map. In 1558, a Venetian nobleman named Niccolò Zeno published a collection of letters and a map that he claimed had been written by his ancestors, 2 brothers, Antonio and Niccolò Zeno, who he said had traveled the North Atlantic in the late 14th century. The map showed the North Atlantic in detail. It showed Greenland. It showed a group of islands called the Friesland Islands, which no modern survey has ever confirmed existed. And it showed with considerable accuracy the coastlines of Northern Europe and Iceland at a time when such charts were not supposed to exist in that form. For centuries, historians dismissed the Zeno map as a fabrication. The Friesland Islands were treated as evidence that the whole document was invented. Then, in the 20th century, researchers began examining the map's depiction of Greenland more carefully. The Zeno Map shows Greenland's interior as a mountainous landmass with rivers flowing from a central highland region to the coasts. Modern satellite and ice-penetrating radar surveys of Greenland have confirmed that this is, in fact, the shape of the land beneath the ice sheet. The ice sheet covering Greenland began forming approximately 3 million years ago. It has been thick enough to obscure the underlying landscape for far longer than any recorded human civilization. The interior geography of Greenland that the Zeno Map accurately depicts has not been visible from the surface for thousands of years. The Friesland Islands that caused historians to dismiss the map remain unexplained. Some researchers have suggested they may represent islands that existed during periods of lower sea levels and have since been submerged. Others have suggested they were simply invented. But the Greenland interior, that part at least, was not invented. It was accurate, and nobody has explained how. Number 7. The Vinland Map. In 1957, a bookseller in Europe offered a manuscript for sale that contained a world map unlike anything previously catalogued. The map showed the known world as of the mid-15th century, Europe, Asia, Africa, but it also showed, to the far west of Europe, a large island labeled Vinlanda Insula, Vinland, the land that Norse sagas had described as a territory reached by Leif Erikson around the year 1000 AD, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. The shape of the landmass on the map roughly corresponded to the northeastern coast of North America, including what appeared to be representations of Baffin Island and Labrador. The map was authenticated by Yale University and published in 1965 to international attention. If genuine, it was the first cartographic evidence that pre-Columbian European knowledge of North America had existed and been recorded. Then came the controversy. Chemical analysis of the ink in 1974 found traces of anatase, a form of titanium dioxide that was not used in ink production until the 20th century. The map was declared a forgery. Further analysis in 1985 reached a different conclusion. New testing found that the ink composition was consistent with medieval materials, and that the anatase could have been a natural contaminant. In 2002, additional testing supported the forgery conclusion again. In 2021, a new study using different analytical methods concluded that the parchment itself dated to the 15th century, even if questions about the ink remained. The map sits today in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. Its authenticity remains officially undecided. The debate has never been fully resolved. What is not disputed: Norse settlement of North America around 1000 AD was confirmed by archaeological excavation at Lonsa Meadows in Newfoundland in 1960. The knowledge existed. Whether it was ever mapped is the question that remains open. Number 6. The Cantino Planisphere. In 1502, an Italian agent named Alberto Cantino secretly obtained a world map from Lisbon and smuggled it out of Portugal hidden inside his clothing. The map he carried was one of the most closely guarded documents in the Portuguese Empire. It showed the coastlines of Brazil, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Guinea, and the eastern coast of Africa with a level of accuracy that Portugal's rivals desperately wanted. But the map contains something that historians have struggled to account for ever since. The Cantino Planisphere shows the Florida Peninsula. It shows it clearly, accurately, and in considerable detail, including its distinctive shape, its position relative to Cuba, and the general outline of the Gulf of Mexico coastline. The official date of European discovery of Florida is 1513, when Juan Ponce de Leon landed on its coast. The Cantino Planisphere was completed in 1502, 11 years earlier. The Portuguese had records of expeditions along the North American coast before 1502 that were never made public. The deliberate secrecy surrounding Portuguese exploration during this period was systematic. The Crown issued orders that captains who disclosed navigational information could face execution. How much of the Atlantic coast of North America had been mapped before the official dates of discovery is not fully known. The records that survived were the ones the Portuguese chose to allow to survive. The Florida coastline on the Cantino Planisphere is one of the pieces of evidence suggesting that the official history of American exploration may be missing a significant chapter. Number 5. The Ottoman Admiral's Charts. Piri Reis was not the only Ottoman cartographer whose work has raised difficult questions. In the 16th century, Ottoman naval expansion into the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea generated an enormous collection of navigational charts. Many of these charts were compilations, assembled from older source maps captured during naval engagements, obtained through trade, or acquired when Ottoman forces absorbed the libraries of conquered territories. Among the charts that survive in the Topkapi Palace collection are several that show coastal features of East Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Indian subcontinent with an accuracy that exceeds what European cartography of the same period was producing. More significantly, some of these charts include annotations in Ottoman Turkish that reference source documents described as being of ancient or unknown origin, the same language Piri Reis used in his own notations. What those source documents were, where they came from, and where they are now is not known. The Ottoman imperial archives were vast, and the portions that survived into the modern period represent a fraction of what once existed. The possibility that a systematic body of ancient navigational knowledge was circulating among medieval and early modern cartographers, passed from library to library, copied and recopied, gradually losing its attribution as it traveled, has been proposed by several historians. It has not been proven, but the pattern of accurate details appearing in maps where they should not exist keeps pointing in the same direction. Number 4. The Dulcert Portolan. In 1339, a Majorcan cartographer named Angelino Dulcert produced a Portolan chart, a navigational map of the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions that is considered one of the finest examples of medieval European cartography. Portolan charts were working documents. They were created for sailors. They were drawn based on accumulated navigational experience, compass bearings, distance estimates, and coastal observations collected over generations of Mediterranean sailing. The Dulcert Portolan is accurate. Extraordinarily accurate. When overlaid on modern satellite maps of the Mediterranean coastline, the correspondence is close enough that researchers have calculated the chart was drawn using data collected from a large number of independent observations, processed in a way that should not have been mathematically possible with the tools available in 1339. The geometric precision of the Dulcert Portolan, and of the Portolan chart tradition generally, has never been fully explained. No medieval European compass, no medieval European measurement technique has been shown to be capable of producing the level of accuracy these charts consistently display. One explanation that has been proposed is that the Portolan charts were not invented in medieval Europe, that they were copied, with modifications and updates, from an older body of source maps that originated in a culture with more advanced surveying technology. Where that culture was, when it existed, and what happened to its records are questions that the charts themselves cannot answer. What the charts can confirm is that the accuracy exists, and that it should not. Number 3. The Ibn Battuta coastal charts. Ibn Battuta was a 14th century Moroccan scholar and traveler whose documented journeys covered approximately 117,000 kilometers, more than any other pre-modern traveler on record. He visited North Africa, the Middle East, East Africa, Central Asia, India, Southeast Asia, and China over a period of nearly 30 years. His written record, the Rihla, is one of the most detailed accounts of the medieval world that survives. But alongside the written record, Ibn Battuta referenced in passing, without elaboration, a collection of coastal charts that he used during his sea voyages in the Indian Ocean. Charts that he described as being of considerable age and of origin unknown to the merchants who had given them to him. These charts have never been found. What has been found in various archives across the Islamic world are navigational references that correspond to routes and coastal features that Ibn Battuta described, and that match, in certain cases, geographical details that European cartography would not document for another century or more. The Indian Ocean trade network that Ibn Battuta traveled was ancient. Arab, Indian, Persian, and Chinese merchants had been sailing those routes for centuries before his birth. The accumulated navigational knowledge of that network, charts, sailing instructions, distance tables, existed in a form that has largely not survived. Ibn Battuta's passing references to old charts of unknown origin are one of the small traces that suggest a larger body of knowledge once existed and was gradually lost. Number 2. The Chinese Map of 1418. In 2006, a retired lawyer in Beijing named Liu Gang announced that he had purchased an antique map from a Shanghai dealer. The map, which he dated to 1763, carried an inscription stating that it was a copy of a 1418 original produced during the reign of the Yongle Emperor. The map showed the entire world. It showed both Americas, with coastlines that included recognizable features of North America, South America, and the Caribbean. It showed Australia, it showed Antarctica, and it showed all of this at a date 1418 that preceded European discovery of most of these landmasses by decades or centuries. The map attracted immediate international attention and equally immediate skepticism. Chinese state media initially promoted it as evidence that Chinese explorer Zheng He had circumnavigated the globe before Magellan. Western historians largely dismissed it as a modern fabrication based on anachronistic details in the cartographic style. The debate has never been resolved to the satisfaction of either side. What is not disputed, Zheng He conducted enormous naval expeditions between 1405 and 1433. His fleet, at its largest, consisted of hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of sailors. The destinations of all 7 of his voyages are not fully documented. Chinese historical records from that period were subject to systematic destruction when a subsequent imperial faction came to power and reversed the expansionist policies that had funded the expeditions. How far Zheng He's fleet actually traveled, and what records those voyages generated, is a question that the surviving documentation cannot fully answer. The 1418 map, genuine or not, exists within a context of acknowledged historical gaps that have never been filled. Number 1. The Orontius-Phineas Map. In 1531, a French mathematician and cartographer named Orontius-Phineas produced a world map that is, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary documents in the history of cartography. The map shows Antarctica, not as an undifferentiated mass of ice at the bottom of the globe, not as a speculative southern continent of the kind that medieval European geographers sometimes sketched in to balance the known landmasses of the northern hemisphere. The Orontius-Phineas map shows Antarctica in detail. It shows mountain ranges. It shows river systems flowing from interior highlands toward the coast. It shows bays, peninsulas, and inlets. It shows a continent with a recognizable shape, a shape that corresponds, in its major features, to the land surface of Antarctica as revealed by modern ice-penetrating radar surveys. The map was produced in 1531. Antarctica was officially discovered in 1818. The ice sheet covering Antarctica is old enough that the land surface it depicts has not been visible from above for at least 6,000 years, and in many areas for far longer. Charles Hapgood, an American historian who studied the map extensively in the 1960s, submitted his analysis to a cartographic committee at the United States Air Force. The committee, after reviewing his comparison of the Phineas map with modern survey data, concluded in a formal letter that the comparison showed remarkable accuracy and that the original source maps used by Phineas must have been made before the Antarctic ice cap formed. That letter exists. It is on record. What does not exist is any identified civilization in any period of recorded history that possessed the navigation technology, the global reach, and the cartographic sophistication necessary to survey Antarctica before the ice covered it. The gap between what the maps show and what history says was possible is not a small one. It is not a matter of a few decades of mistaken dating or a coincidental resemblance. It is a gap of thousands of years. Either the maps are wrong, and the specific, verifiable accuracy of the details they contain makes this increasingly difficult to argue, or the history of human civilization is missing something very large. Something that built ships capable of reaching the ends of the earth. Something that produced maps accurate enough to be used 6,000 years later by cartographers in 16th century Europe who did not know what they were copying. Something that left its records behind in libraries and archives across the medieval world, scattered and unattributed, gradually losing its context as the centuries passed. The maps are real. The accuracy is real. The gap is real. What filled it is the question that nobody has answered. Thank you for watching and sticking till the end. We've got plenty more videos coming in the future. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss them. See you in the next one.